questions.
Let me ask you this.
What did you, hold on, Jesse, you said a moment ago, you said that the people in Egypt today don't look black, right?
Right.
So let me ask you a question.
The ones that are ruling Egypt.
Right.
And yes, you do have some black-looking folks live over there, but they ain't doing nothing.
Well, let
They're
me
just
ask you a
sitting back
question.
looking at the Egyptians making the country great in the same way.
And then this is just a stupid statement. Egypt has more than one group of blacks. It has the Nubians, who are concentrated in the south, and they had their ancestral homelands and their ancestral farmlands flooded deliberately by the Egyptian government in the 1970s, and this is something they've never truly been compensated for. And also, aside to that, there also are just black Egyptians who live in the northern part who aren't Nubians. You find black Egyptians just scattered around. The problem is they're never classified or accepted as Egyptians by the modern, I'm going to say mulatto population. I'm not going to say Arab, because the population is a mix of kind of Greeks, Arabs, Ottomans, Mamluks, Persian, all of that, and European. All of that ancestry is kind of mixed in and around the modern Egyptians. The problem is, whenever people reach a certain level of Africanity in their appearance, these people, because they are racist, try to exclude them and say they're not a part of the history, when in actuality they are the history. They are the history, the people who are the darkest. And this was acknowledged. You can look at documentaries from the 1940s, I've got footage from 1925, where these large black populations were widely acknowledged as being the closest related to the ancient Egyptians. So this is something that's gone from being acknowledged less than 100 years ago to now being something where they've pushed these people to the outskirts. Okay, what's going on, people? Welcome to the King's Monologue. I wanted to react to this video. It's actually quite ironic because Jesse Lee Peterson, which is a name that I hoped I'd never have to say on this channel, to be totally honest with you, has recently reposted a clip from an interview that he did with a brother called Shakka Ahmose about 3 years ago. Now, clearly he must think this is some kind of a flex because he's reposted it, and I don't know why. The only reason I actually knew that this interview existed is because I watched it a couple weeks ago, because brother Shakka Ahmose reached out to me, and I think I'll be doing an interview with him on the channel or the Down with the King channel in the coming weeks. He's a really humble brother, very knowledgeable about ancient Kemet, so I think we'll have a really excellent conversation. At least I'm hoping for that. But I went back and I watched the interview, and I think he did an excellent job considering how ignorant Jesse Lee Peterson is. You know, Jesse Lee Peterson comes across to me as someone who I'm actually tempted to believe that he might even be someone who's wearing prosthetics, because he doesn't look like any black person I've ever seen in history. He doesn't talk like any black person I've ever seen in history. And his viewpoints are so extremely anti-black that I'm not even sure it's a possibility for a black person, even a self-hating one, to have the kind of views that he has. Obviously, he's built an entire platform having this anti-black grift, which he proliferates and makes a good amount of money from. You know, he monetizes his hatred and his ignorance for melanated people globally, and it's the most bizarre thing to behold. But in spite of this, brother Shakka Ahmose is able to navigate around his ignorance, navigate around his incredibly basic understanding of, you know, basically everything, you know, from politics to history to everything else, and I think still perpetuate quite a strong message. Now, what we're going to watch back is not the full interview, because that would take too long for me to react to, but it's the clips that have been provided by Jesse Lee Peterson on his channel TheFallenState. So it's a clip down version. He obviously thinks that these clips make him look good, but in my view they don't. But I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to react to it and to see if I can support some of the statements and add clarity and just give my opinion on certain parts of this conversation and try to add value to the discourse. It's quite interesting because like I said, it's a 3-year-old piece of content that I likely wouldn't have engaged with, but the fact that it was reposted has just given me an opportunity. And perhaps this will act as a little bit of a preface to my actual interview with brother Shakka Ahmose on the channel, and give us a talking point, something to speak about as well. So anyway, here it is. Hope you enjoy it. And yeah, let's just get into it. So by the way, the video is titled, "If Blacks Are So Smart, Why Don't They Build?" And builds in capital letters, all caps. This is the kind of really low vibrationary, low IQ content that, you know, Jesse Lee Peterson puts out. He is, I'm going to make this very clear, this man is vile, absolutely vile. He's abhorrent. Anyway, let's get into the content before I get too emotional and react.
So why blacks don't do better if they're so smart?
Right.
And they believe they're ahead of everything? Why don't we see them doing better? They're destroying. They're not building anything.
I mean, straight off the jump, you know, to say if blacks are so smart, no one's making that claim. He's the kind of person who will suggest, if he puts forward the idea that all black people are inherently stupid, which he does all the time, and inherently deficient, he frequently references his own IQ and uses his black skin as an explanation for the reason he's stupid. He doesn't own, there's no individuality when it comes to owning his own individual inability to, you know, function correctly in society. I mean, just looking at him, I doubt he has a family. I'd be interested to see if he does. That's a big presumption. I'll have to Google it after I've done this reaction, but he doesn't come across to me like the kind of person any female would be able to stomach even being touched by. And I think this still actually is probably provides a good explanation as to why I've suggested to you that he might be wearing prosthetics. I don't know, there's something very artificial about the way the way he presents. It doesn't look real to me, but that's me obviously just speculating. He could just be a very unfortunate black man, which is probably the case, and that might make you bitter. So there you go.
Well,
White people who are alive today has nothing to do with the condition of the blacks.
Right.
And so blacks are unwilling to have a fair and real discussion.
Okay.
I mean, this is just gaslighting. It's really hard. Very hard to watch. Let's let Brother Ahmose respond to this.
So here's the problem. There is inequity in your conversation. You keep speaking about how hateful black people are towards white people.
Yes.
And the issue with that is that
he reaffirmed that with a yes. This is absolutely crazy. So he speaks about how hateful black people are to white people, and this is the kind of accusation that you couldn't back up with data. If you was to ask a black person, provide evidence or proof that white people are hateful towards black people, it's like, well, where do I start? It's like we have an endless supply of historical narrative on the African continent, on the American continent, in the Asian and European subcontinent. We have all of this, you know, data, you know, from lynching to Jim Crow to the Mau Mau murders to the occupation and the several genocides that took place in Africa to the genocides in Argentina. I mean, it's just like we could just go on and on and on and on and on and on right up to present day belligerence, military belligerence against people of melanated ancestry. But if you was to flip it the other way around and just ask a very simple question, can you provide evidence of black people's hatred towards white people? The only thing you'd get is rhetoric. You wouldn't get anyone supplying you with any evidence, because when black people have been in the opportunity to return the same kind of heinous energy, even in the Americas, for example, when the black people in America essentially won the Civil War and were, you know, won their emancipation and were in a strong military position in many places, they could have gone and enacted revenge on slave masters, fed their kids to alligators, committed lynchings and race riots, and took land that didn't belong to them. And they didn't do that. They just went away and they built They went away and they created their own communities. They've never ever responded in kind to the kind of belligerence and aggression that has been directed towards them. And this, you could just see this repeated globally. So it's just this is a really foolish statement that he makes, but this is why he's been able to build an audience of basically hateful white people. That's who his entire audience is. That's where he gets his monetization from. Just hateful white people, because anyone with an iota of common sense just wouldn't listen to him. They wouldn't be able to stomach him for more than a few seconds.
You are basically advancing an image that is it belies the actual facts. And the actual facts is that the hatred is mutual. It's not one way. It's a mutual dislike and hatred.
And this is where I feel like he's relented a bit too much here, because this, once again, say the hatred is mutual, I would ask you for evidence. I would ask you for actual referenceable events that took place that prove that black people hate white people in America. You know, you can't reference protests and say that's evidence of black hatred towards whites. You can cite event after event after event after event of white groups, people who identify as white, ranging from right up the top of the state, the military, the police, right down to, general population, enacting mass violence against black people who have done absolutely nothing to them. And you can never cite any events that at least were worth recording historically of black people enacting mass violence against whites just for the sake that they were white. There's just no evidence of it. So I would even say he's relenting a little bit too much to Jesse Lee Peterson's false narrative here.
It certainly is.
No, it's not. It's really not.
It is. But here's the thing. It's
unfair. Really not.
It is. I know that it is because I live in America. I live in the same country you live in.
It's really not. It's an illusion to think that.
It certainly is. No, here it is. If you make a...
And this is the thing, he provides no evidence. He just make these claims. It really, really is, and really not but he doesn't provide anything. There's nothing of substance that he's able to provide. It's just rhetoric. It's just talking points that make white people feel better. And then you get, politicians stand up and saying, you don't have to feel bad about being white anymore. And it's like, well, who made you feel bad about being white? Are you able to actually cite a situation, some kind of a event that took place, or some kind of law that was written in that actively disadvantaged you? Cite some statistics where you can prove that you've been actively disadvantaged, or is it just a feeling that you have? Because that's all a lot of this revolves around.
A conscious choice not to see it. So here's the thing.
No, right? I can see what's going on, man.
No. Okay, Jesse, here's the thing. The hatred...
And I don't like when people like Jesse Lee Peterson try to occasionally lean into their black vernacular. It's done in an insulting way. It's like even where he just said, man, I can see what's going on, man. That was done deliberately, because what he's trying to do, people like him tend to do that when they're saying something extremely racist, because what it does is it softens the edges. It's an attempt to make their entirely racist and unjustifiable statement more palatable to the audience by saying, hey, man, I'm a black man when I'm saying this, man. I really hate niggas, man. You know what I mean? Can you see how the man rounded off that statement? Without that, it sounds raw, but with it sounds much more acceptable. So he knows what he's doing here, which is, once again, I get a similar feeling with Obama, and I know I'm not going to say this too long, but I get a similar Manchurian candidate feeling out of both of these guys. They really both give me the impression of, a white man in black prosthetics. I'm just being honest with you. That's the feeling I get from both of them. And I know that's going to sound crazy to a lot of you, and it is. I'm not presenting it as a theory, but I just think there's something weird and bizarre about the way they present.
It's mutual. It doesn't require for you to agree with it. It doesn't require for anyone on your staff to agree with it. The hatred is mutual. That is, and by depicting it as being one way, you are going to be part of the problem and not part of the solution. Rather than saying, hey, look, here's a list of reasons why, or here's a list of grievances from both sides. Here's a list of grievances from white people, why they strongly dislike black people. Here's a list of grievances from black people, why they strongly dislike.
I don't think Jesse Lee Peterson is trying to be a solution, any kind of solution. I think that's the issue here. There's going to be no attempt made to be a solution. He wants to be a problem. Okay, that's his purpose, is to perpetuate hate, is to rage farm, I think it's called, when they get people enraged and then farm profit from that rage that they're creating. So it's to rage bait and then to kind of like farm the benefits from those negative sentiments that they're putting out there. This is what he does. So there's no solution. This is the difference between a grifter like him and people who are actual researchers like Brother Shakka Ahmose, you know, people who are actually out there creating historical content. There's a complete difference. So you do yourself a disservice trying to have a discussion or equity-based discussion with someone like this who has bad intentions. They don't have any good, there's no good intentions there, there's bad intentions. And yeah, and that's all there is to it.
It's like white people. But and then you sit down and you have an honest discussion about it. The point that I'm making to you and to your show and to your audience is that no one on either side is prepared to have a real conversation about race. And here's the thing, you cannot have that race.
White people want to have a real conversation.
Hold on.
Do you see that? White people want, like, this is really weird and bizarre behavior to just basically just suggest that one side wants to have a discussion, the other side doesn't, and you're advocating for the side that you don't belong to. This is not, even a white supremacist would be, you know, would have some aversion to being that brazen with dishonesty. They'd at least be able to kind of like meet you halfway and say, yeah, it's right, it's true. They'd probably relent at this point and say, yeah, it's both sides, knowing that it's probably the white side more than the black side. But Jesse Lee Peterson's not even relating there. He's like, you know, white people want to have the conversation. It's black people who are racist. It's like, this is just literally an inversion of reality. That's all you're doing. You're literally just inverting reality and then presenting it to your audience, and it makes them feel good. And then you'll see things in the comments like, oh, he's so good at trolling people, this, that, and the other. Like, people are praising him for basically lying, being dishonest, gaslighting, rage farming, and basically just being a really horrible human being. These are the types of things that will prosper people in this day and age. You know, being the most deplorable human being, you know, that's what will prosper people. You know, grifting, being alt-right, all of these things that used to be looked down upon are so profitable now. You know, like that woman that Hendrix lady who said the N-word to a child. Like, literally the worst behavior that you could expect out of a human being. The worst. Like, what's the most egregious thing that a human being could do? I know, abuse a child. Abuse a child. Okay, cool. We're not only going to put this person who abused a child on a platform, we're going to make them rich as well. That's the kind of world that we live in. And that's the kind of world that Jesse Lee Peterson is, you know, benefiting from.
Cannot have that discussion divorced from history. It is impossible.
No, it's not. What? No.
You cannot have that discussion divorced from history. And I'll tell you why. Because people are walking around with racial illusions and racial delusions in their mind. That includes you. That includes your staff.
No.
That includes people that follow me. 1 second. That includes people that follow me. That includes people that follow people like Farrakhan and everyone else. When you are historically illiterate, everybody in the room is a fucking idiot. And that's what it comes down to. It takes people who actually know history to put people on the same page. So that's when you need that. So that's when you need to start asking.
And this is such a good point that I feel that Shakka Ahmose has raised here. Historical illiteracy is the calling card for a lot of these grifters. Okay, a lot of these grifters just rely on perpetuating narratives that have no historical basis. It's like they all live in kind of like they're all what's it called again, last Thursdayists or something like that. I can't remember what that cult is that believe the world was created last Thursday, because it's something that you can't disprove. So essentially what they do is they say, we don't care about history, stop talking about the past, and they literally reset everything to today. You know, the whole world literally just started today. Everything that happened before today is irrelevant. And look, this is like the typical, you know, Charlie Kirk and kind of like far right, alt-right commenter. This is what they rely on, you know, Nick Fuentes. Well, look at the world today. Look at all these black people. They're all suffering, blah, blah, blah. White people are doing well. It's because we're just so much smarter than your average black person. And it's kind of like imperialism, colonialism, slavery, genocides, continual military wars, aggression, suppression. These are active things. Do you understand what I'm trying to? It's like, it's not even, it shouldn't be controversial having knowledge of present and past. You know, that should just be a basic of like having any kind of logical discussion. Any kind of progressive discussion should always start with framing. You know, you should be able to say, okay, well, how do we get to where we are currently? You can't just take a person's current position and suggest that there were no contributing factors to get the outcome. But they rely on that. They rely on that because then it gives them the support of white exceptionalism, which is what they all agree in. And they can completely discount the history of scientific racism, which ensured that the lie of white supremacy was fed with, you know, pseudo-scientific backing. You know, they can ignore all of that and they can just focus and on their present situation. Literally, they could burn your house down yesterday, move their family into it after 6 months, put you in the middle of a swamp, okay, and then hit record the following day and say, look at you, oh my God, look at you, you're just, you're a real waster, aren't you? Look at my wonderful family living in this big, beautiful house. Why are you there and us here? Like, what kind of mistakes have you made in life? This is the kind of ahistorical approach that these people rely on. And then I always say the most offensive thing you can do to many of these ahistorical personalities, these grifters, the most offensive thing you can do is quote them. There's two things they hate. They hate facts and they hate being quoted, because it's guaranteed they've always said something, or they've said something in the past that contradicts what they're saying at the moment. It's always a guarantee. So the most offensive thing you can do is quote them, just like you saw with Charlie Kirk. People were getting so offended because people were playing clips of stuff that he had said, and then all his fans were like, what about context? What about context? It's like the context doesn't help. Yeah, there's no help in his cause. The dude was a racist, and we're not going to be sad about his death. We're going to, in fact, be quite happy. We're going to move on, and we're going to carry on enjoying life. No one's going to mourn that POS. If you want to mourn him, that's your business. Don't put that on our doorstep.
The right questions.
Let me ask you this.
What did you, hold on, Jesse, you said a moment ago, you said that the people in Egypt today don't look black, right?
Right.
So let me ask you a question.
The ones that are ruling Egypt.
Right.
And yes, you do have some black-looking folks live over there, but they ain't doing nothing.
Well, let
they
me
just
ask you a
sit back
question.
looking at the Egyptians making the country great in the same way the
And then this is just a stupid statement. First of all, to suggest that the blacks in Egypt aren't doing anything. Just to give some historical context for those of you who don't know, Egypt has more than one group of blacks. It has the Nubians, who are concentrated in the south, and they had their ancestral homelands and their ancestral farmlands flooded deliberately by the Egyptian government in the 1970s. And since then, they were supposed to be obviously paid compensation so that they could relocate. That essentially never came, or came in very, very small number. They find themselves struggling a lot more than they should be. They should be much more of a financial presence in the state of Egypt than they are, but they had their ancestral homelands destroyed deliberately, and this is something they've never truly been compensated for. And also, aside to that, there also are just black Egyptians who live in the northern part who aren't Nubians. They live in the parts like, you know, Cairo and Alexandria and Nephayim and the rest of the Delta region of Egypt. You find black Egyptians just scattered around. The problem is they're never classified or accepted as Egyptians by the modern, I'm going to say, mulatto population. I'm not going to say Arab, because the population is a mix of kind of Greeks, Arabs, Ottomans, Mamluks, Persian, all of that, and European. All of that ancestry is kind of mixed in and around the modern Egyptians, which has created this kind of, I wouldn't even say it's a fixed phenotype. It's certainly a phenotype that has a massive range. The problem is, whenever people reach a certain level of Africanity in their appearance, these people, because they are racist, try to exclude them and say they're not a part of the history, when in actuality they are the history. They are the history. The people who are the darkest. And this was acknowledged. You can look at documentaries from the 1940s.
These ever brought to light. Typical villagers are these aging patriarchs. Although many generations removed, it is possible that the blood of the pharaoh still courses the veins of these dark-skinned natives of this land of antiquity.
Footage from 1925, where these large black populations were widely acknowledged as being the closest related to the ancient Egyptians. So this is something that's gone from being acknowledged less than 100 years ago to now being something where they've pushed these people to the outskirts. So for Jesse Lee Peterson, just to even make the insulting statement that the blacks are just hanging around and they ain't doing nothing, not only is it just, you know, patently false, it's also very disrespectful to the heritage of these people, disrespectful to what they've been through and what they're currently going through and the struggles that they currently fight. The Nubian populations are currently constantly in dialogue and in political discourse with the, you know, Egyptian government, who essentially doesn't respect them, doesn't respect their rights, you know, persecutes them quite heavily within their own nation. So there's a lot going on there. And so for Jesse Lee Peterson to make that really insensitive, stupid statement, which I wouldn't expect anything less from him, it's just very offensive. But it's important that people understand that.
Blacks are doing over here, man.
But the blacks in Egypt are Egyptians. So when you say the Egyptians, you're saying the Egyptians are making the country look great.
The one that don't look like y'all.
You mean the one that don't look like us?
Yeah, you guys.
That don't look like us?
What?
What about the ones that don't look like us?
They're the one making...
And did you notice how he said the ones that don't look like y'all, not us? So he doesn't regard himself as black. Now, a lot of people will just say, well, that's just a Freudian slip, or he's just being facetious, or he's just trolling, you know, he's just saying it tongue-in-cheek. But I think there's more to it than that.
Egypt, great. They're
okay,
the one
so I'm asking you a question. My question to you is, why is it that those people who are running the country in Egypt, why is it that they don't look like us?
Because they are the original Egyptian.
And that's where you're wrong. That's what I mean.
But let me tell you, I gotta move on. No.
Okay, 1 second before you move on. I don't want you to give your audience misinformation. You just said that they're the original one.
I've seen them before. I know Egyptians.
You got it backwards.
He thinks he's unique because he knows Egyptians. First of all, I'm not even sure if that's true. Not that it would be hard to know Egyptians. I mean, they're incredibly well-traveled populace, much like Nigerians. You can find Egyptians in most states in the world. So knowing them is not a big deal. The issue is, are you familiar with the state? Are you familiar with the people? Are you familiar with the phenotypic range? Are you familiar with the culture? Yeah, I think you can tell that Jesse Lee Peterson struggles probably knowing the culture of the street he lives on, let alone the culture of Egyptians. So I wouldn't hold my breath.
They are not the original ones. They are descendants of those who are not the people who created the state of Egypt.
So they're lying too?
Yes, they are.
So the white people...
So this is one point where I just create... I always throw a little bit of a quid pro quo in there, in that even if someone it looks phenotypically completely divergent from modern African populations, like many Egyptians do, you just don't know people's ancestry, you know. So coming from someone who has, you know, mixed race niece and nephew, who, you know, could, you know, possibly end up having white partners, and as a result would have, you know, offspring who would almost look entirely white, because I've seen kids who are kind of like 3/4 white, 1/4 black, where you can't even trace that there's any black ancestry. This can happen in a very short space of time, yet you wouldn't be able to deny those kids their, you know, black granddad. You know, they have a black granddad at the end of the day. And the point I'm making is that Egypt is there's definitely been diffusion, I would say, genetic diffusion, and it's a very mixed nation. Having met Saidi people all up the Nile, essentially, met some really dark ones and some very light ones, there's definite African ancestry. Yeah, definite recent African ancestry. Some of them it's really obvious, and others it's harder to see. But the point being that actually runs throughout the nation of Egypt. You find many with like quite curly, some would say somewhat Afro-presenting hair, and then you find some with very straight hair. Okay, even with the ones where it's difficult to see, you just don't know what the ancestry is. So I think it's a harder point to defend. It's a less defensible standpoint to say these people are all invaders. I actually think it's much more likely that they just, like many people, some people don't hold any ancestry, and some people hold trace ancestry. Some people hold a lot of ancestry and it doesn't present. That is devoid or separated from the argument about what were the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians were an African civilization. They were an African culture. They were an Afro-presenting people that looked like populations of modern Africa. That and the modern appearance of the Egyptian population are two separate discussions. Phenotype can shift and change and drift very, very quickly. Very quickly. Phenotypes of towns and cities can completely shift in 1 or 2 generations. You know, literally go from black to white in a very, very short space of time. And that doesn't tell you about the amount of admixture that has taken place. So I always just leave a bit of room to say, my argument would be the modern Egyptian population present this way, and we can prove there have been several introgressions from different parts of the world that have contributed ancestry into what we classify as the modern Egyptian state. And you have to account for that ancestry. You can't ignore the Black Sea slave trade. You can't ignore the Mamluk slavery. You can't ignore the Greek settlement, the large-scale settlement of Greeks. You can't ignore the Persian settlement. You can't ignore the Roman settlement. You can't ignore the Arab settlement. You can't ignore the Ottoman settlement. You can't ignore all of these introgressions of people from the outside. You have to account for that ancestry, and you have to accept that that is reflective in the modern day populations, and that would explain why they present in a much more mulatto mixed, sometimes light skinned, and sometimes right all the way up to white appearance. That is, that you can explain that using the historical narrative, and that is enough to shift a demographic. It doesn't necessarily say there's a complete cutoff. That's an argument that I would be more reticent to put forward.
Lying, the Egyptians lying, the Jews are lying, everybody that's doing great are lying about the blacks.
But that's the way history works.
So why blacks don't do better if they're so smart?
Right.
And they believe they're ahead of everything? Why don't we see them doing better? They're destroying. They're not building anything.
He's just creating a straw man here. This is just words to sound good in front of his audience, but they aren't actually supported or even presented by anybody. He's just kind of like saying it to be belittling of a black scholar and of the black arguments that are being presented.
Well,
aha.
1 second. Hold on 1 second. This is not an aha moment.
He was really proud of himself there as well. Oh, oh. Brother almost had to just say, hey, brother, don't, this ain't an aha moment. You don't need to be proud of that weak speech you just gave. And I think he must be proud of that speech because he's reposted this. Bear in mind, this is a repost of a 3-year-old. Why he dredged this back up again? He must be proud of his performance. I don't know why though.
First of all, you say that they're not building anything.
They're destroying. Look what they're doing to America. Look what they're doing to Egypt. And
look what they're doing to Egypt. Look what who's doing to Egypt. What have black Egyptians destroyed in Egypt? This guy is not even historic. This guy is literally politically inept. He knows nothing. He's just making stuff up. Look what they're doing in Egypt. What are you talking about? The only destruction we can think of recently that happened in Egypt happened when the light-skinned people who you say are responsible for making Egypt great, which is a phrase I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, because the state of Egypt is just not a great state. It's not a great place to be. It's actually, you know, it was one of my worst trips that I've ever taken, and if it didn't have the monuments, it's a country that I just wouldn't go to, and I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's just not a nice place to be. But the only destruction that we can reference was the flooding of Aswan, or flooding of Meroe, or whatever you want to, however it's being phrased, because it's such a large landmass, they're not even sure entirely what they destroyed. But the one thing we can agree on is that is the biggest single destruction of known ancient artifacts that's happened in history, and that was done by the light-skinned population and enacted upon the dark-skinned population. Once again, it's a one-way thing. Light-skins enacting terror, enacting destruction, enacting hatred upon the dark-skinned population. So you're sitting there going, look at what they're doing in Egypt. Like, what are they doing in Egypt? Trying to build it, trying to rescue the monuments. Like, no one would look disparagingly upon the Nubian population from outside. No one's ever made such a stupid argument before. So this just shows you how politically inept and how historically ignorant he is.
Let me ask you a question. Blacks in Egypt are destroying Egypt?
Yeah, meaning that they ain't doing nothing over there. Just sitting back looking at the Egyptians working hard and doing their thing. Why aren't blacks doing better if they're so smart?
You said, why aren't blacks doing better if they're so smart?
Yes.
Standards.
By their own turn, or by the country that they live in, or by other people. Right. They just
Brother Ahmose at this point is just being flustered by stupidity, and I get that. I've been there. When someone dogpiles you with so much untruth and stupidity in in a row, like one after the other, you get flustered, because as someone who is educated, what you're trying to do is you're trying to give a reasonable response, a well thought through answer. You're not just trying to shoot from the hip, because unlike him, you're not a grifter. So you want to make sure that what you're going to put forward is the truth. And then they ask you something else that is even more egregiously incorrect, even more false, even more made up, and you assume, you're just trying to calculate, wait, did he just really ask me something so stupid? So I get this level of fluster that he's feeling right now, because he's probably thinking, how do I answer someone who literally I can barely hold a conversation with?
Just build ghettos and they get in it, they destroy white people, good stuff.
Okay, hold on 1 second. You said
and he clearly hasn't seen the Nubian architecture to make the accusation that black people in Egypt just build ghettos, because Nubian architecture is some of the most beautiful cultural architecture that you'll see in the world today.
Black people build ghettos? Yeah. I've never seen a black person build a ghetto.
Well, you've been in Africa too long now. You need to look around.
No, hold on.
Look what they just did to the country. They burned down buildings.
He can't even say the word country. Look at it just did to the country. And I hate to be a grammar Nazi or accent, but this is more than that. This is when someone is so ignorant and stupid. Black people are just destroyed. Let's even talk about America, like making the claim that black people built the ghettos, which is the first thing I think Brother Ahmose wanted to retort to, and then he's saying, they're just burning down the country. It's like, none of this is true. This is all... How do you respond?
They destroy businesses. They kill cops.
I want to say something. You had a guest on. One second. You had a guest on the other day, and I don't know if it was the other day because I watched your show, a few of them, just to get to know you a little bit better. I didn't want to prejudge you. And one of your guests was a Jewish professor who grew up in Lebanon, and I really enjoyed the interview. But the one thing that I noticed about the interview is that you interact differently with different guests. You afforded him a certain level of respect and a certain level of deference that I don't see you give to other guests. Other guests you don't take seriously. You will insult their intelligence, and you'll basically disrespect the discourse. And I think that that's unfair, right? And so I think
this is really excellent by Brother Ahmose, because I'm telling you right now, I know myself, and I wouldn't have the patience. I've tried to discourse with people who are admittedly less ignorant than Jesse Lee Peterson, and I've just descended into into a rage because I can't discourse with when people are stupid and then they're not allowing you to retort with common sense, and then they're dogpiling you, like I said, with stupidity. I'll just get angry. I know me already. I've been there before. I'll just get angry and be like, you're an idiot. I'm out of here. He's doing something really brilliant here. What he's doing is he's kind of appealing to what might be, a tiny glimmer, like in like in Get Out, where they exist in the sunken place.
Good to see another brother around here. Yes, of course it is.
There's a little Negro somewhere in Jesse Lee Peterson's sunken place trying to get out, and what he's doing is he's just like, he's flickering the flash, trying to get that little Negro out. Like, look, I know it's in you. We can have a reasonable discourse. Just try and be like you are. It's a very excellent tactic. I rate him for this.
The same type of respect that you afforded him and that you extended to him, I think that you should extend that to all your guests, because your audience will be the richer for it. You allowed him a graceful measure of time in which to respond to your questions so that people could really be informed. So he described the experience of the Jews in Lebanon and how they were at a disadvantage because of their numbers, right? And so if you look at but
you know what it is?
America,
some people go like they talk too long and I'm running out of time.
Okay, no, I respect that. But if you look at the black people in America,
but I have no resentment or anger toward any of my guests or anyone, right?
He said he has no resentment or anger towards any of his guests or anyone, and he was literally just accusing black people of doing nothing but destroying, and didn't provide any citations, didn't provide any references, and also accused black people of having unfiltered hatred towards white people, and white people are desperately trying to engage them in conversation and black people are refusing, and didn't provide any evidence or citations or references for that claim either. So I think one thing he has shown is a definite hatred towards black communities globally. He's even accused the black Egyptians of doing nothing but running down the country and building ghettos while the white Egyptians make the country great. This is someone who, he really is an enemy. I'm sitting here and I am laughing and stuff like that. It's somewhat amusing, and obviously we can look and we can appreciate Brother Shakka Ahmose's performance, which I think was a good one, given the level of the level cognitively of opposition that he was up against. But at the same time, I kind of want to share to you guys as my community, this guy's very evil, and I don't use that word lightly. This is a very, very evil man, and I don't want people to kind of take the jolly old man, oh, I'm just a simple man, blah blah blah. I don't want people to, these are the kind of people who white supremacy and lies and Eurocentrism need to collude with to perpetuate their lies. They need people like this who are going to essentially infiltrate the progress that we make and try to, you know, disassemble it from within. This is a very, very evil man, because he'll do anything to essentially dress his own pockets, and that includes completely sending out his people, exposing his people to harm, you know, justifying the killing, the mass unalivings. I mean, this guy has got numerous videos basically suggesting that Trayvon Martin deserved to be unalived by George Zimmerman and it was all his fault. He's got numerous videos. So I want you to understand how evil this man is. He is a very, very evil man. I view him as evil. Like, he's evil, and I've got no time for people like him. I don't offer any kind of olive branch, or I don't want to have a discussion. Being an African person, it's much easier for us. I think one thing about Africans, because we're very exposed to good and bad, you know, like we don't have, if you go to an African nation, we don't have like an active white supremacist community, for instance, in Nigeria. The people who are doing the evil in Nigeria are Nigerians. The people who are doing the good in Nigeria are Nigerians. So I can easily identify an evil black person and be totally happy with the fact that there's no redemption for them, and this is one of them. I think this man is an evil. I'm just expressing that honestly. I think he's evil.
And so it's just you deal with different personalities and you have different conversations.
I can respect that. I can respect that. So with my personality, if you ask me a question, what I want to do is I want to try to be, the reason I don't rush to answers, especially when somebody's asking me a question like what you asked me about black people, why aren't we doing better, right? The reason I don't rush to the answer, and you notice your first initial reaction because I said was The reason I hesitated is because when I answer questions like that, I want to be as responsible as possible. I don't want to just say the first thing that comes out of my mind.
Well, don't take too long because time
I
goes by.
respect that. No, I respect that. If you say the first thing that comes to your mind, there's a really good chance that you may be wrong and you may answer emotionally, and it may be a reactionary answer.
This is one of the things that he's highlighted really well here about the kind of like online debate scene, and even just the debate. This is why a lot of far right grifters like the whole debate thing. You know, they love the gotcha moments. So even when I did my debate with Meta, which a few of you may have seen, that with that Egyptian guy, I really tried to steer it away from us having one of those debates because I don't think they're valuable. It's like, what we want to do is we want to have a discussion, and we want to have enough time to think about responses and even time to reference our responses, so that what's being said is being backed up by a source, being backed up by some actual citations, so that you know what I'm presenting you is true. What people like Jesse Lee Peterson wants is people who are gonna answer, you know, their queries just like that, off the cuff. Doesn't matter if they're right or wrong, as long as the crowd goes woo woo. That's the main thing. And brother Shakka Ahmose here is making it very, very clear, you're not going to get that out of me. You're going to get a thoughtful response. Now, what's really excellent about this is often this perception is not afforded to us Black or Afrikaner scholars, who essentially the term Afrocentrism is used to tar us, to tar our perspectives, and to devalue our inputs, to devalue our research, and to devalue our insights, to make it seem like we are these just emotional people who don't have any citations, any sources, any references. But actually, when it comes to a discussion, we're often the only ones who are providing citations, and it's often the other side who are relying on these sound bites without any actual sourceable evidence. If you go to a lot of the kind of Afrikaner scholars who are presenting the, you know, African civilizations, one of the things that we're able to cite, you know, almost in an unlimited fashion, is the links between modern African culture and the ancient Nile Valley cultures. We can present that very, very easily. We're able to present and to justify that very clear link between our modern cultures and our ancient cultures. And that link is something that can't be denied. This is something that people who sit outside of the Africana space are unable to do. When they're trying to create, when even these historians and academics try to create these Levantine links, it's like, okay, cool. You're claiming that there's a genetic Levantine link, although I can debunk all of those claims, but I'll do that in another video. But you're claiming a Levantine link here and a Levantine inheritance here. Do you have the cultural evidence to support that? Are you able to support that anthropologically? No, you've just got this isolated claim because you see this gene here and this gene there, and therefore these people must have brought civilization to these people. But then when we're able to provide full cultural context, from the fauna to the flora, to the belief systems, to the rituals, to the totemism, to the language, to the, just every aspect of anthropology, from the physical to the biological to the linguistic to the cultural, all of the strands of anthropology support the African ethnogenesis of the Nile Valley populations without exception. And we're able to present that because we have the evidence. That's why we don't rush to make an assessment. We don't rush to make an answer, because what we're being careful of is saying something that could discredit something that we say or present in the future. And sometimes that doesn't always give you the best at that moment soundbite, but it will certainly prove beneficial in terms of the longevity of our arguments, which is why the arguments made by Shakka Ahmose in the 1974 UNESCO conference still stand up to scrutiny today. And in contrast to that, the arguments made by his dissenters and his detractors don't have any longevity. All of the works of these great Egyptologists who were racially motivated, like Figeac and Petrie, all of their work you'll see and all of the work they tried to do around phrenology, their own data is disproving them. Samuel Morton, their own data is disproving them as time goes on, because it was never grounded in truth to begin with, and that's why they're clutching at straws, trying to find new areas of investigation and trying to discard the old areas, because the old areas are all falling in line with the Afrocentric perspective.
What was the first thing came to your mind when I asked, why don't, if they so smart, the blacks, why don't they do better?
I think, honestly, it's a combination of a number of things. It's not just any one thing. I think it's a combination of a number of things.
What's the primary thing? What's the primary reason?
I think the primary thing is I want to hold on.
You see, there's once again one in that instant response, and he wants to give a sound response here. And Jesse's like, looks like he's about to have a stroke.
To say instinctively, I want to say racism.
Yep.
Okay, instinctively. But there is a part of my mind that is historic.
By the way, racism is the answer. Yeah. There's no two ways about it. It's not like a cope. Okay. The first reason why black or melanated people find themselves in a certain position and white people don't find themselves in that position almost globally is because of the active enforcement of racism globally, of caste systems globally. All of the empires, when the British Empire fell, all of the colonies that they had set up, they ensured they put the light-skinned populations in control of the dark-skinned ones. They ensured they killed off the dark-skinned monarchies, the dark-skinned monarchs, the dark-skinned rulers, and put in place, sometimes transporting people from different colonies into populations they didn't belong and placing them in positions of leadership. This happened in the Middle East quite a lot, in Qatar, for instance, where the royal family come from India. They've ensured right across the African continent, right across all of the colonies in Asia, Europe, and America, that there's been an active caste system where it's been beneficial to be white and it's been a disbenefit to be black. This is actively enacted globally, and many populations have, the light-skinned people have benefited from this. This is a historical fact. It makes perfect sense. We don't have to talk about the justification of the slave trade, XYZ, and all the motivating factors. But yes, racism is an answer. One of the things that we mustn't allow to happen is for us to become fatigued with using racism as an excuse, which is what people like this like to try to accuse us of. It's not an excuse. It's a historical fact. It is a referenceable and easily referenceable behavior of those that were colonizing versus those that were colonized. There was racial hierarchies. That's a thing that continues to go on in many countries to this day. In fact, it probably exists overtly in more countries currently than it doesn't. These are, that's just a fact. So don't be reluctant to use racism as an explanation to this very simplistic question, because ultimately it is the answer.
Historically informed, and I would say that it has to do with certain things about ourselves that we have not yet confronted. And that's why I said earlier, neither side wants to have an honest conversation. There's certain things about Black history and African history that Black people will refuse to talk about. They will, because it doesn't make us look good, right? And so it's a lot easier to say white people, white people, white people, white people, white people. And I'm saying, wait a minute. I'm not saying that white people have not played a part in our dysfunction. But until you are willing to have an honest conversation about our own history, divorced from white people, before white people even showed up, we had certain issues. And until we discuss that, those issues are going to continue to plague us, and they are going to continue to play out, whether it's white people that are dominating us, whether it's Asian people that are dominating us, or whether it's Latin people that are dominating us. You first have to get your own historical house in order.
This is a really good point he's raised here, because I wouldn't necessarily, in fact, I wouldn't disagree with it at all. It's something that I've already mentioned. I see actively in my home nation of Nigeria, but also being someone who's becoming increasingly well-read in the different aspects of Black people and melanated people globally throughout history. We've never been restricted to the African continent, to be clear. In fact, the reason we have a global population is because Black people made several traverses out of Africa into various parts of the globe on multiple occasions. We continually left the African continent and continually peopled different parts of the world. That's how the world got populated. So this idea that Black people have been restricted below the Sahara doesn't even make any sense, because Homo sapien sapien, that is black man, Homo sapien sapien 100% is always a black man. That's historically supported. Homo sapien sapien traversing out into the different parts of the world is world history. That's global history. That's human history. That's our history. So we have to accept that Black people have tread every square foot of the globe. But something has happened where that's affected our present, and our history being deconstructed has made it harder for us to understand the gap between where we are now and where we were historically. And I think conversations do need to have pragmatic ones. One of the things that I'm quite open and accepting of these days as well is when I grew up, I always had this idea, because we were so persecuted, and many Black people growing up, Black will kind of resonate with this. We always got the idea that Black people equals good. And, we're the spiritual ones. We've never done anything. We've always kind of been the victim, and they're the evil ones who are doing this, that, and the other. And that is very much a perspective you just kind of learn to accept. So it was very hard to read history and see, and every time you see like a black king or a black ruler or a black monarch pop up, you just assume on a subconscious level, oh, he must have been good. They must have done something evil to get rid of him. And that's one of the first things that I think I've had to continually adjust, is the fact that, wait a second, just because there's a black ruler here, a black monarch, a black population, it doesn't mean they were good. Okay, black people are just as capable and have just as much of a propensity to abuse power historically as white people do. And I'm sure they've committed acts. In fact, I've seen that some people who live on the African continent, they'll be able to agree with this, like, yeah, of course. But I think people outside, maybe people in the diaspora, we find it a little bit harder to accept, yes, black people did do bad things, especially if you look historically beyond a certain point, not too far into our history, there weren't any white people. So all the people doing good and bad, you know, were black. And you have to learn to accept that blackness doesn't necessarily equal purity of spirit and equal goodness. This is one of those facts we have to accept. So I'm glad he's raising this point. I've perhaps gone a little bit left of what he was raising, but I do resonate with the point he's making here.
Individual.
Well, not just as a collective and as
because
individual.
Unless you know yourself, you'll not ever be of any good to anyone else. But let me ask you this.
I agree with that.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Who made a more classy first lady? Big Mama Michelle Obama or Melania Trump?
It's amazing that you refer to Melania Trump by her name, but you refer to Michelle Obama outside of her name.
No,
I
mean, it's just blatant disrespect. This is why I call him evil. Like I said, people kind of like will find this playful, and I'm sure a lot of people will laugh. And by the way, I'm no apologist for like leftist politics or for the Obamas or anything like that. I still see all these people as part of a very large oppressive white supremacist machine. So I'm not interested in all of that. But that's disrespectful, what he's just done. For him to refer to former First Lady Michelle Obama as Big Mama, you know, it's like, this is why I don't think he's black, because it's kind of like there comes a point where it's like, okay, I get it that you're conservative or this, that, and the other, but you're just being like, you're just saying what the KKK would say. So why should I feel any more affectionately towards you if you have KKK talking points, KKK thought points, KKK outlook, but you've got black skin? You know, you would readily harm myself and my family. You'd readily maybe even Jim Crow us, if you know what I'm talking about, if you got the opportunity. But I'm supposed to look at you affectionately because we share a complexion. No, this guy's evil. Straight up and down, he's evil. I wish the worst on him.
I said Big Mama Michelle Obama.
You refer to that as Big Mama, but that's not her name. So that's what I'm talking about. That is your innate disrespect for black people that is being put on Front Street.
Who is more classy, Big Mama Michelle Obama or Melania Trump?
And respectfully, who rates Melania Trump? I'm sure no one. I mean, this is dated, like I said, it's 3 years old, but like, who rates Melania Trump? Michelle Obama is a skilled orator. She's a qualified individual. I mean, there's nothing there to throw that kind of shade and to, you know, disrespect her. There's never been a situation where she's, you know, handled publicity in a way that I, as a black person, looked at and thought, oh my God, she's such an embarrassment. She hasn't done that. Whereas Melania Trump, it's kind of like, the word, I don't want to be insulting, but she doesn't come across as anybody who's providing any kind of inspiration, any kind of skilled orator, and anyone who probably has anything to offer other than being the wife of Donald Trump. This is the difference. And these are the kind of different standards that we see enacted upon, you know, black people as a whole. You know, we are always so much more excellent than our counterparts, and still degraded to make it seem like there's there's equity when often there's not. This is the whole kind of like anti-DEI thing that I've addressed so many times. You know, DEI or affirmative action exists to regulate and to force white recruiters who exclude people who are more excellent than the people that they're hiring. It forces them to not exclude. It forces them to consider the applications of people who they normally just write off on the premise that they present as black. And you'll find that the people who are actually benefiting when there's none of those schemes in place is that these companies would just, default to doing nothing but hiring unqualified white men who don't deserve it, white men who haven't done the hard work, who haven't got the qualifications. Like I keep saying, if you're in America, and actually in the UK, if you're in any country, the person who is most likely, if you go to any organization, to be the least qualified is a white male. That's the person who's most likely to be the least qualified, because it's the most unlikely that a white male is in their position based on the merit of their skills. They're normally there because they're a white male. If you're getting on a plane and you're like Charlie Kirk, you're like, oh my God. If you get on a plane and you have a black female pilot, I guarantee you she's probably one of the best pilots in the country. If you get a black pilot, I guarantee you they're going to be brilliant. If you get a white male pilot, that's probably your highest probability that you're going to crash into a mountain. Because you don't know if they're there for merit, or they're there because they're someone's son, or they're there just because, you had one more position going and you just gave it to the next white guy that walked in. So this is the irony, how they try and flip this and gaslight us about these things.
When you ask her name correctly, I'll answer the question with respect. When you say her name with respect, I'll answer the question.
Is it ever okay to tell a woman she's fat? Thanks for watching the.
So yeah, there you go. I mean, he's not a worthwhile human being. I simply watched that back more for Brother Shakka Ahmose than anything, because like I said, I might have him. I think I will have him on one of my channels very soon. It's likely going to be Down with the King. We'll probably do a long form podcast, and maybe I'll post clips to this channel. But I'm really looking forward to our conversation that's going to be forthcoming in the future. I think he handled himself and that interview really well. Like I said, I wouldn't have been able to stomach this guy for the amount of time that he did. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed that little reaction. I think I'll see from the reaction to this, or the response to this, if I'll do more of these reactions to historical, although this one ended up being a bit more political than I was happy with. But I'll try and do more reactions to this kind of like historical content. I think I'll do the next one. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. We'll have a little bit of a discussion, and I'll see you on the by the way, if you're not subscribed, please make sure you're subscribed. Hit the like button up, share it if you're that way inclined, and if you want to support me, please check out the link to the Patreon in the description. And I think that's it. Yeah, that is it. Peace.